Hi, welcome to Chapter 10, Section 2 for the American pageant. We're going to be talking about political parties, the emergence of political parties, all the way up to Jay's Treaty. So we talked about the formation of the government with the President Washington being inaugurated and his first cabinet and all that stuff, and everything looked great. Washington was elected by unanimous decision. He got every electoral vote. And it looked like everybody was on the same side because we had just beat the British. That doesn't work though. Political parties began to really kind of form, even though they didn't exist when Washington took office. They formed because of a rivalry within his own cabinet between Alexander Hamilton on the picture on the left and Mr. Thomas Jefferson. They didn't like each other and they played for Washington's favor a lot, and they wanted him to approve their plans. And Washington routinely sided with Alexander Hamilton. He really trusted him and let him write up some of his plans and even some of his speeches. Jefferson, they're both from Virginia, but Jefferson's a strange enigma. He's kind of a man of contradictions. I've said that before, but he's kind of a snake in the grass. He releases things about Washington and personal attacks, and he hires writers to write, negative things about the president, and really does some sneaky, underhanded stuff to kind of tear down both Washington and Hamilton. So in the 1790s, Jefferson and Madison organized their opposition to the Hamiltonian program, which is his own economic program, which Jefferson actually agreed to at a dinner party. He reluctantly agreed to it. He regretted it the rest of his life, and so the opposition emerges because this was really in Congress to start, but Hamilton. His program is then put in play, and Jefferson really kind of starts working behind the scenes to form opposition to Hamilton. In due time, though, it was organized, the opposition, into what would become the first two-party system in American history. Eventually, you're going to get the formation of the Federalists, which is the party of Hamilton and Washington and Adams, and then you get the party of the Democratic Republicans, or Republicans, not our modern Republicans, which is Jefferson and Madison and all of them. So if you look at the two, eventually that are formed, you have the Federalists, and then kind of keep this in mind for the next, chapter and a half here, all the way up to about 1812. This is really the two parties in America, actually to about 1814. You have the Federalists led by Hamilton and Adams. They also have Washington on their side. They supported the president and his policies. And they didn't, they weren't outspoken against him. They supported a strong federal government, needed to keep the peace, to keep the people in line. They were pro-British because of the value to trade. Even though they just beat the British, they realized that Britain was necessary for America to grow economically. They believed in manufacturing and building a nation of industry. These are a lot of Hamilton's ideas here. They also believed in a rule of the wealthy class, that there should be some elites, some educated, powerful men that are in charge of the country, not the people or the mob, as they would call it. And they also believed in a loose interpretation of the Constitution, meaning, if the Constitution doesn't blatantly say you can't do it, you can kind of stretch it a little bit. And so, that's how they justified the Bank of the United States. They also supported their national bank, and they wanted tariffs to protect American industry. And they were mainly in the Northwest and in the wealthy South. On the other hand, you have the Democratic Republicans, or the Republicans, who were led by Jefferson and Adams. They attacked Washington, often secretly. Jefferson was notorious for this. They believed in strong state governments, that the individual states were more important than the federal government. They were pro-French. France was our ally against the British just in the war, and so they supported the French in this ongoing, war and conflict that was, erupting in Europe at the time. They believed in agriculture, which meant that they thought the nation should be ruled by a bunch of yeoman farmers, small farmers, people that own land. That's they have a lot to lose, and so that's what they believed in. They also believed in a strict interpretation of the Constitution. For money, they didn't want a large national government, or national bank. They wanted state banks, and they believed in free trade, which helped the little guy, not the big factories. And so they were popular with small farmers and the urban workers of middle America. So here's the evolution of our major parties in American history. You can see the Federalists, they die in 1816. It's the War of 1812 that kills them. The Democratic Republicans, and they evolve into the Republicans. And you have the era of good feelings. There's only one party at that time. And then you have the National Republicans, John Quincy Adams, and then eventually the Democratic Republicans, or just the Democrats, which is Andrew Jackson's party, kind of evolved all the way to the present. And then the National Republicans later became the Whigs, and then later became our modern Republicans. Republicans kind of switched sides, and all the way to the present. And we can argue, if you really want to get into political science, have they stayed true to their causes, or they've shifted, or have they met in the middle? But we don't want to get into that. So the French Revolution. Washington's first administration ends in 1793, and on July 14th, 1789, the French stormed the Bastille and started the French Revolution. Two political groups had emerged at that point. Like I said, the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans, the Hamilton Federalist, and the French Revolution started in 1789, and eventually it just kind of brought a lot of Europe into this conflict. It began peacefully. I mean, they stormed the Bastille, but they weren't chopping people's heads off yet. They basically, the Third Estate wanted power, and they were inspired by the American Revolution and our Declaration of Independence, that the people can have a voice in government. They have the consent of the governed. The ideals of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, opportunity, and equality. Those things played very well in France. But the French Revolution being, I don't know, it just gets a little wacky because they start whacking everyone's head off. Not everyone. It turned violent when France declared war on Austria. Austria supported the monarchy. Eventually, they behead King Louis XVI. They chop his head off. They kill the Queen, Marie Antoinette, who was from Austria, actually. So we got some infighting, some family feud going on. Louis XVI was beheaded in 1793. The church was attacked. They didn't like the power of the Catholic Church. And then under Robespierre, you have the Reign of Terror, where they just start chopping people's heads off. And you have that very graphic image of a guy getting his head chopped off, and there's blood spewing into the bowl there, and there's a guy running around with his head on a stick. Ooh, look, it's fun. Or not. It's kind of scary. And so at this point, Britain enters the war, and so America has really a tough time, what to do here, because Britain is our trade ally, and France is our military ally, and we're actually bound militarily through an alliance to help the French. But we're kind of a new country. We don't really get involved. We don't have any money. So what do we do? So we're affected by these events way off across the ocean in the continent of Europe. So here's a painting of the storming of the Bastille, very famous painting here. Here's the key to Bastille, which actually is in Mount Vernon, Virginia. Marquis de Lafayette gave it to Thomas Paine, who gave it to Lafayette's best friend, George Washington. So it's at George Washington's house. So our Franco-American alliance was still in effect in 1778. We were actually bound from it to defend the West Indies against future foes. So if France goes to war against Britain, we have to defend the Caribbean, and that's part of our alliance. They helped us defeat the British, and we have to help them defeat the British as well if it comes to it. The Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans wanted to support the French in their war against the British. They saw a lineage, they saw a connection, basically similarities that, hey, we're just like them. We should help them out. They're trying to win their liberty just like we did. Remember when we did that? Back in 1783 when we beat them at Yorktown. Oh, man. Actually, that's 1781. 1783 is the Treaty of Paris. It's getting late. The Federalists, of course, were opposed because they would hurt their trade and their economic standing with the British. And so Washington did the wise thing. He issued the Neutrality Proclamation in 1793, which said, we're not involved. You guys go fight. We're a new country. We've got to take care of ourselves. In the meantime, this guy, Hamilton, backed him. Debates were raging on the merits of this proclamation. Does it work? Are we violating our alliance? In the meantime, this Frenchie there, Edmund Genet, or Citizen Genet as he wanted to be called, landed in South Carolina to try to recruit American soldiers and privateers. Like, hey, you guys want to come fight in France with us? Come on, it's fun. We're fighting for the cause of liberty. Remember when you did that? Playing off on people's memories, just kind of like reboots and sequels and, The Force Awakens and member berries from South Park. Remember Star Wars? That was fun. Remember Liberty? Remember the Boston Tea Party? That was fun. Washington didn't like Edmund Genet because he was spreading those memories and said, get out. He had them expelled from the country because we're neutral, and you can't just go recruit Americans to go fight in your war. What are you doing, you crazy Frenchie with your weird hair? And I don't even know what's going on with that turtleneck thing. So we kicked him out of the country. And really, what was needed in France was our food, not our arms. They had plenty of guns. They had a powerful army. They just don't have a lot of peasants, farming for them. In America, we got lots of food. I mean, obviously, we're fat. Hey, look at me. Whee! So that gets us in problems with the British. The British didn't respect us. They signed that Treaty of Paris, but then didn't follow through. They didn't remove their troops from America. They kept their troops in the forts in the Ohio River Valley. The British fully expected, yeah, they could trade with us a little bit. They thought we would fail, that we would go bankrupt and come crawling back to them and say we're sorry. They also aided the natives. The British, this is sad, but they'd love to give the natives guns and say, hey, you know what you should do? You should go attack Americans. That'd be, just do it, man. I dare you. I dare you. Come on, man. And so there was this guy named Chief Little Turtle of the Miami Confederacy, that's Miami of Ohio, who defeated two American generals in 1790 and 1791. They had British guns, they had British ammunition, they had British everything, and the Americans were getting very upset, especially those living out in the frontier. But things turned about for the Americans at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. General Anthony Wayne crushed the Miamis. They crushed Chief Little Turtle's little confederacy, and eventually got them to sign the Treaty of Greenville, which gave up all native claims to Ohio. That's a lot of land. The natives, they lost Ohio. Oh, that's too bad. And so then eventually we can have Cleveland, or the mistake by the lake. But now, it's 2016. We have Cleveland. They're going to win everything except for the Cleveland Browns. The Royal Navy, picking on us, started seizing 300 American ships in West Indies and impressed our sailors. They did not impress them by going, look at their muscles, yeah. Impress means you're a part of the Navy now. You're on our side. Here's the uniform. Start swabbing the deck, matey. Arr. I don't know. They're not pirates. Jeffersonians are all fired up. You're encroaching on American sovereignty. You're doing these naughty things. You're kidnapping Americans. You're seizing our property. Let's go to war. War with Britain Part 2, the sequel. Dun dun dun. And the Hamiltonians and and Washington are like, whoa, we're not getting involved. We're neutral. The Federalists didn't want to do anything drastic. We don't want to make Britain mad. Hamilton needed trade with Britain to make his economic policies work. All those loans and banks and everything. If we don't have the British, our country will go bankrupt. And so they're like, whoa, we're okay losing a couple ships and some men. At least they're in the British Navy. They'll get a cool uniform and drink a gin and tonic or something. We don't need to do anything drastic yet. So here's some of the fighting going on. Harmer's defeat in 1790, St. Clair's defeat in 1791, and the Battle of Fallen Timbers was by Anthony Wayne there. And you can see all those little red dots were where the British had forts on American soil. And just kind of going, take that, America. Kick us out if you want. Here's a painting of the Battle of Treaty of Grenville and all that stuff, and where they gave up Ohio. So lastly for today, John Jay was sent to London. He was the Supreme Court Chief Justice as a last resort by Washington in 1794 to avoid war. Washington wants our country to develop and not get involved with Europe because they're always fighting at that point. Jay's treaty was eventually signed, and it was very controversial back in America. A lot of people, including some Federalists, could not support it. It was lambasted, it was ridiculed, especially by Republicans, but the British finally left U.S. lands. They finally took out those forts in upstate New York and Ohio and the Northwest Territory. They also paid damages for seized ships. They paid for those boats they took in the Caribbean. They allowed us to trade with them again a little bit, kind of those exclusive rights that we had under the navigation laws, and so that helps our American industry, helps our American economy. But we had to pay back our debts that we owed them before 1776. So, oops, yeah, we thought we got out of paying all that stuff because we broke away. Yeah, okay, we'll pay back all that tea we dumped in the harbor and some of the other things going on. There was no mention of the two hot topics, though. There was no mention in this treaty of impressment, seizing American sailors and forcing them to join the British Navy, and giving guns to the natives. Jay's Treaty, what it did was a band-aid, and it kind of delayed war for at least 20 years, roughly a little less than that, and kept us out of war. And it basically got America's wishes, Washington's wishes, excuse me, of neutrality. It did cause Spain, which actually feared an Anglo-American alliance, to strike a deal with the United States. And so shortly after this, Charles Pinckney, I believe, went and signed Pinckney's Treaty, which Spain granted America free navigation of the Mississippi River. We could use New Orleans, which used to be France's possession, and they gave us, some disputed territory north of Florida. And so, by signing this one treaty, even though it was lambasted and ridiculed because we had to pay back money to the British, and there was no mention of impressment and arming the natives. It avoided war with the British and allowed the Spanish to eventually sign a treaty with us just the next year. And then Washington announces he's retiring. He doesn't give a speech. This is kind of a misconception in history. He publishes it. He actually was only going to serve for a couple of years, and then he was only going to serve one term, and then he was going to serve 6 years, and then he decided, all right, 2 terms is good, 8 years. And a year before, his 8th year, he announced to the country through newspapers, mainly in Philadelphia, that he was leaving office, and which shocked Americans. They thought he was just going to be the president until he died. He was setting the precedent basically of, how long a president should serve, which was 2 terms, and most presidents followed that until, it's a constitutional amendment, the 22nd Amendment, after Roosevelt died, was ratified in 1947. But in his farewell address, he gave advice to a growing nation, like a father giving advice to his son going off to college. And he said, you know what, stay out of Europe's business. Stay neutral. Don't form permanent alliances. Please, grow as a nation, which America does. For over 100 years, for about 100 years, we do that, and we do grow substantially. We become an industrial, worldwide giant power. The other thing he says is don't form political factions. Don't form parties. It just causes you to fight, you argue, and it's us versus them. Come together over the big things in America that we have in common. We have so much in common in this country. Don't divide yourself on trivial little details about policy and economy and taxes. And you probably listened to that going, well, we didn't listen, did we? In fact, they formed political parties to replace President Washington. He left office in 1797, but what he did, he put our government on firm footing, and commerce was booming, and America was on its way to becoming the great, great nation that we are. And we could go so much more in depth about President Washington. He did so much to get our country going. He set the examples for many, many other presidents to follow, including how do you address the president properly. They had meetings in the Senate about his exaltedness, and he just finally said, just call me Mr. President, which works. So if you have any questions or comments, put in the comments. Hope you enjoyed this. Have a good evening.